Imagine buying a $3 cup of coffee.
Okay, sure.
You hand the barista a $100 bill, and you accidentally tell them to just, keep the $97 as a tip.
I mean, that barista is having a great day.
Right. But in the Bitcoin network, if you don't understand the hidden math of your wallet, you could do exactly that. And people actually have.
Oh, absolutely. It happened.
There are blocks out there where someone manually constructed a transaction using a 20 Bitcoin input to make a 1 Bitcoin payment, forgot to route the change back to themselves, and permanently handed a lucky miner a 19 Bitcoin tip.
Yeah, it is a brutal lesson in how the raw consensus layer actually operates.
Okay, let's unpack this. Welcome to today's deep dive, where we are exploring the surprisingly cutthroat, high-stakes, hidden mechanics of Bitcoin transaction fees.
It's a fascinating topic because, most financial systems have a tidy little line item for a fee. The payment processor charges 2%, it's clearly labeled, and the system moves on.
You just swipe your card and don't think about it.
Exactly. But Bitcoin flips that entirely. The fee is literally just leftover math.
Wait, what do you mean leftover math?
Well, it is simply the sum of your inputs minus the sum of your outputs.
Okay.
There is no dedicated field in the transaction data structure that explicitly states, like, here is my fee.
So it's just whatever's missing.
Right. Whatever's left over after the inputs are consumed and the outputs are generated, the miner just sweeps that up.
Which means we are playing in a totally different arena here. It's an open auction, and you are bidding for space.
Wow.
But let's pause on that option dynamic for a second, because a massive question comes up when you look at how the network is incentivized today.
Okay, lay it on me.
Miners are already making a fortune printing new, freshly minted Bitcoin every time they find a block.
Yep, the block reward, it's substantial.
So if they are already getting paid to do their job with that reward, why do we need to pay transaction fees at all?
Well, the block reward is a massive incentive, sure, but it doesn't solve the physics problem of the blockchain.
The physics problem.
Yeah, space is strictly finite. You can't fit infinite transactions into a block. So if you have thousands of users broadcasting transactions simultaneously, and a miner can only fit, say, a fraction of them into the next block, they need a sorting mechanism.
Ah, I see.
Miners are rational economic actors. I mean, they want to maximize their revenue. So the fee is your bid to outcompete everyone else who wants their transaction processed right now.
Okay, but is there a hard floor? Like, does the system mandate a minimum fee just to participate?
Not at the consensus level, no.
Really? None at all.
None. There is no strict consensus rule in the core protocol dictating an exact minimum fee. A block containing a zero-fee transaction is technically perfectly valid according to the cryptographic rules of the network.
Wow, okay. But I'm guessing you won't actually get that transaction confirmed today.
Not a chance. You won't get it confirmed because of policy rules. The individual nodes running the network have to protect themselves.
So there's a difference between a consensus rule and a policy rule.
Precisely. A consensus rule applies globally to the validity of the blockchain. A policy rule is just how an individual node protects its own physical hardware.
Like its memory.
Yeah, it's RAM. Every full node maintains a waiting room for unconfirmed transactions called the mempool. And that mempool lives in the node's physical RAM.
Which is obviously constrained.
Right. Nodes default to capping their mempools at about 300 megabytes, which is roughly a day's worth of transactions under heavy load.
It makes me think of like a short order cook at a really busy diner.
Oh, that's a good analogy.
Yeah, the cook has a physical whiteboard where they pin all the incoming orders. That whiteboard is the node's RAM.
Okay, I follow.
If the dinner rush hits and the board is completely full of tickets and a new customer walks in offering a massive tip for a burger, the cook isn't going to turn them away.
Definitely no.
They're going to pull the lowest tipping order off the bottom of the board, throw it in the trash, and pin the high-paying order up top.
Exactly. And the consequence of that diner dynamic is the implicit minimum relay fee rate.
Right.
If your fee doesn't outbid the lowest paying ticket on a full whiteboard, nodes won't even accept your transaction into their mempool to pass it along. It just gets dropped entirely.
And how you calculate that bid is crucial, right? Because you aren't just looking at the total flat fee.
No, miners calculate the fee rate by dividing the total fee by the physical size or the weight of the transaction. You're bidding in satoshis per byte.
Which is basically like comparing bags of rice at the grocery store.
How so?
You don't compare a massive sack of rice to a tiny bag by just looking at the sticker price. You divide the price by the weight to find the cost per ounce.
Exactly. It's the exact same math.
But you have to be incredibly careful with your units here. If you accidentally look up a fee rate estimated in, say, satoshis per kilobyte, and paste that number into a custom wallet field that expects satoshis per byte, you just overpaid by 1,000 times.
Or worse. I mean, wallets try to put guardrails in place to prevent what developers call an absurd fee, but at the end of the day, you are the final arbiter of the cryptographic signature.
It's all on you.
Yeah. And this free market auction dynamic introduces a major friction point. Because the going rate for block space is entirely dependent on demand, it is incredibly volatile.
Right, so you bid what seems like a perfectly competitive fee on a quiet Sunday, and by Monday morning, some market event triggers a massive spike in network traffic.
And suddenly your transaction gets pushed to the bottom of the whiteboard.
Exactly, your bid is too low and your funds are stuck in unconfirmed limbo. So what happens then? What is the mechanism for the sender to actually get unstuck and reach into the network to alter their bid?
Well, the primary tool for a sender is RBF. That stands for Replace by Fee.
Okay, how does that work?
You are essentially broadcasting a brand new, conflicting version of your original transaction that pays a higher fee.
But the network can't just let people endlessly spam alternative versions of transactions, right? That sounds like chaos.
It would be. There have to be strict criteria. There are 4 non-negotiable conditions for a valid RBF under standard node policies. Let's hear them. First, the replacement transaction must explicitly conflict with the old one by spending at least one of the exact same inputs.
So that proves to the network that only one of these versions can ever be mined.
Right. Second, it must pay a higher fee rate, so more satoshis per byte.
Makes sense. What's the third?
Third, it must pay a higher total absolute fee than the original transaction.
Wait, hold on. Let me challenge that third condition.
Go for it.
Let's say I realize my first transaction was just way too large and bloated, so I rewrite it to be much more efficient. Maybe I drop some extra outputs, and I shrink it from 200 VBytes down to 100 VBytes.
Okay.
Even if I double my fee rate to make it highly attractive to miners, my total absolute fee might actually be lower than my first attempt. Why would the network reject a more efficient, higher rate transaction just because the total fee is lower?
That is a great question. It comes down to denial of service protection.
How so?
Every time a node evicts your old transaction and validates your new one, it burns CPU cycles. If attackers could replace transactions over and over without paying a higher total fee, they could just endlessly broadcast slightly smaller transactions.
Oh, and force the entire network to perform computationally expensive mempool reorganizations for free.
Exactly. The higher total fee rule ensures the attacker explicitly pays the network for the bandwidth and processing power required to process that replacement.
That makes perfect sense. You have to compensate the network for the overhead of changing its mind.
Right.
So what's the final condition?
The fourth rule requires the replacement to ideally include all the original inputs.
Why is that important?
Well, if you start swapping inputs in and out across multiple replacement attempts, you risk creating versions of the transaction that don't actually conflict with each other.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, if a miner gets hold of 2 non-conflicting versions you broadcasted an hour apart, they could just mine both of them. And suddenly you've double paid the receiver.
Yikes. So here's where it gets really interesting. That RBF capability fundamentally shattered an old assumption in the ecosystem.
It definitely did.
Because there used to be merchants who relied on zero confirmation transactions. If you sent a payment with a decent fee, they assumed it would confirm eventually, so they'd hand you the digital good immediately.
Right, the old zero-com standard.
But RBF breaks that entirely. If I can replace my transaction with a higher fee, I can easily replace it with a transaction that pays me back instead of the merchant. I walk away with the digital good, hit RBF to reroute the money, and the merchant is left holding the bag.
And let me tell you, the merchant community was furious when RBF became standard.
I can imagine.
They wanted it removed because it made it incredibly explicit that unconfirmed transactions are simply unconfirmed. They are not final.
Right.
But the reality of a decentralized protocol is that you cannot force a rational miner to ignore a replacement transaction if it pays them a higher fee. The initial compromise developers came up with was BIP 125.
That was the opt-in RBF, right?
Exactly. Popped-in RBF meant a transaction had to include a specific cryptographic signal indicating it was allowed to be replaced. So merchants could just check for that signal and reject the payment if they saw it.
Though the network is increasingly moving toward full RBF anyway these days.
It is, yeah.
But here's the major limitation of replace by fee. It requires the sender's private keys.
Right, because you have to sign the new transaction.
So what happens if you are the receiver? You are waiting for funds to arrive, but the sender was stingy and attached a rock-bottom fee. You can't use RBF. You can't magically forge the sender's signature to bump the fee.
No, you can't. But the receiver's recourse is a mechanism called CPFP.
Child pays for parent.
Exactly. With CPFP, anyone who receives an unspent output from an unconfirmed transaction can take that output and spend it immediately in a brand new transaction.
And this new one is the child.
Right.
But wait, how does spending unconfirmed money help the stuck parent transaction?
Because the consensus rules dictate that a child transaction cannot be included in a block unless the parent transaction that created its inputs is also included. They are inextricably linked.
Oh, so they move together.
Yes. The network evaluates them together as a package.
Huh.
This is known as ancestor fee rate mining.
Okay.
So if you, the frustrated receiver, attach an astronomically high fee to your child transaction, a miner is going to look at the mempool and really want that child fee.
But to get it, they have to mine the cheap parent first.
Exactly. They are forced to mine the low-fee parent transaction first. The high-fee child essentially drags the low-fee parent across the finish line.
That is a brilliant workaround. But aside from just being a frustrated receiver waiting for a payment, in exactly what situations is RBF completely impossible, making CPFP literally the only tool that can save the day?
The most critical use case is in multi-party time-sensitive protocols.
Like the Lightning Network.
Exactly. When you open a Lightning channel, you and your counterparty create pre-signed transactions to settle the channel state on the main blockchain later. Because those transactions are signed by both parties ahead of time, neither of you can unilaterally alter them later to bump the fee via RBF. Altering the transaction invalidates the other party's signature.
So if network fees spike violently when you need to close the channel, that pre-signed transaction is just dead in the water unless you can pull it through with CPFP.
Yep. You broadcast the pre-signed parent and immediately broadcast a high-fee child spending from it to incentivize the miners.
But there is a structural vulnerability there, isn't there?
A massive one. If network fees have spiked so high that the pre-signed parent transaction doesn't even meet the implicit minimum relay fee, remember the short order cooks.
Right, they won't even put it on the whiteboard. They just drop it.
Exactly, they drop it. So when your high-fee child transaction arrives a second later, the node rejects it because it has no record of the parent. From the node's perspective, the child is trying to spend money that doesn't exist.
The child becomes an orphan, and the CPFP fails entirely. That sounds catastrophic for a system like Lightning that relies on executing these transactions before specific deadlines.
It is a nightmare scenario. But the defense developers have been working on is called Package Relay.
How does that fix it?
Well, instead of a node stubbornly evaluating transactions one by one and dropping the cheap parent immediately, Package Relay allows nodes to receive and evaluate the parent and the child together topologically.
So it sees the whole picture.
Right. The node sees the combined fee rate of the entire package, realizes it's highly profitable, and accepts both into the mempool at the same time, averting the crisis.
Okay, so what does this all mean? We have these powerful levers, RBF for the sender, CPFP for the receiver. But whenever you introduce complex rules to manipulate an auction, sophisticated actors are going to weaponize them.
Oh, inevitably.
How do attackers use these exact fee-bumping mechanisms to execute denial-of-service attacks against honest users?
This introduces a whole class of attacks known as transaction pinning. Yeah. Pinning exploits the mempool limits and replacement rules to intentionally trap an honest user's transaction so it cannot be bumped. It basically pins it to the bottom of the mempool.
Let's break down how an attacker executes RBF pinning. Earlier, we established that to replace a transaction, you have to pay a higher absolute fee than the original.
Correct.
But if that original transaction has any children attached to it, those children get orphaned when the parent is replaced. So the rule is actually that you must pay more than the original transaction plus all of its descendants, right?
That is exactly the exploit.
Walk us through it.
Imagine Alice sends a standard 100 VB payment to Bob. But Bob is malicious. Bob immediately takes his unconfirmed output and constructs a massive, bloated 100,000 VB child transaction attached to it.
Wow, okay.
Now, if Alice realizes her initial fee was too low and tries to RBF her payment to get it confirmed faster, the mempool logic steps in. The network tells Alice she doesn't just need to outbid her tiny 100 VB transaction.
She has to outbid Bob's giant transaction, too.
Exactly. She has to outbid the total fee of Bob's 100,000 V-byte monstrosity
Yeah.
because her replacement would evict Bob's transaction from the mempool.
Alice is suddenly required to pay an astronomical fee just to execute a basic RBF.
Yep. Bob has economically pinned her transaction.
That is wild. What about CPFP pinning? How do you weaponize the child pays for parent mechanism?
That relies on exploiting the physical limits of the nodes. Evaluating deep, complex chains of parents and children takes heavy computing power.
Right.
If a parent has dozens of descendants and it gets evicted, the node has to recalculate the mempool math for every related package. To prevent node crashes, the software enforces a strict limit.
What's the limit?
A parent transaction can have a maximum of 25 unconfirmed ancestors or descendants, and their total combined size cannot exceed 100,000 V-bytes.
And let me guess, an attacker just fills that quota.
Precisely. They spam a transaction with 25 garbage descendant transactions, hitting the hard limit.
So when the honest user comes along,
When they try to use CPFP to bump the fee of the parent, the node rejects the honest child transaction because the family tree is already full.
the waiting room is entirely packed with the attacker's fake VIPs, blocking your real VIP from getting through the door.
That's a great way to picture it.
Why is this so dangerous for the Lightning Network specifically?
Because Lightning relies on strict cryptographic deadlines.
Right.
If your counterparty tries to cheat you by broadcasting an old, revoked state of your channel, you have a specific window of time, measured in blocks, to broadcast a penalty transaction and sweep all the funds.
So it's a race against the clock.
It is. If the cheating counterparty can use pinning to trap your penalty transaction in the mempool until that deadline expires, the network finalizes their theft. They manipulate the physics of the auction to basically silence your defense.
That is terrifying, which obviously requires an incredibly nuanced countermeasure.
It does.
The protocol developers introduced something called the CPFP carve-out.
Yes, the carve-out.
It's a highly specific rule exception that says, even if a transaction has hit the absolute limit of descendants, a node will allow exactly one extra child transaction, up to 1,000 V-bytes in size, to bypass the limit, provided it's a direct child.
It's an emergency escape hatch.
But to use that escape hatch effectively, Lightning channels use something called anchor outputs. Explain the mechanics of an anchor output, because it sounds really abstract, but it's actually quite literal.
It is very literal. When Lightning nodes construct their commitment transactions, they deliberately add extra tiny outputs to the transaction that belong to each party.
How tiny are we talking?
Almost zero value, often just 330 satoshis, which is barely above the dust limit.
Okay, so why are they there?
Their sole physical purpose is to sit on the transaction waiting. They are cryptographic hooks.
Oh, I see.
If the transaction gets stuck or pinned, the honest party can grab their specific anchor output and attach a CPFP child transaction directly to it.
And because of the carve-out rule?
Exactly. Combined with the carve-out rule, it guarantees that no matter how much garbage an attacker attaches to the main outputs, you always have a clean, dedicated hook to pull your transaction through the mempool.
It's just a fascinating arms race between attackers finding edge cases in the node policy and developers engineering structural workarounds.
It really is a game of cat and mouse.
But everything we've discussed so far is about fighting for block space today. We have to look at the ultimate end game of transaction fees.
The future.
Yeah. Every 4 years, the block reward gets cut in half. We're heading toward a future where the block subsidy approaches zero and transaction fees become the sole incentive for miners to secure the chain.
And that reality introduces a theoretical attack vector that fundamentally challenges the stability of the blockchain.
What's it called?
Fee sniping.
Let's dig into that.
Under normal incentives, a miner looks at the mempool, bundles the best transactions, and tries to mine the next block to move the chain forward.
But fee sniping changes the timeline.
It does. Imagine we are at block number 100,000. It gets mined, and it happens to contain incredibly lucrative, massive transaction fees.
Okay.
If the block reward is zero, those fees are the only thing of value. A large, well-resourced mining pool might look at block 100,000 and realize it's more profitable to attack the past than to build the future.
Wait, really?
Yeah. Instead of trying to mine block 100,001, they point all their hash rate at remining block to 100,000.
Because if they successfully rewrite that block, they get to choose the transactions.
You got it.
They can steal the high-fee transactions that were in the original block, bundle them with any new high-fee transactions that just hit the mempool, and pull them all into their rewritten version of history to maximize their profit.
And if that game theory takes hold, the blockchain loses its immutability entirely. It would constantly experience deep reorganizations as miners relentlessly try to snipe the best fees from recent history.
But the wallets have an elegant defense against this.
They do.
It relies on a specific field inside every transaction called unlock time. Explain how unlock time mathematically prevents a miner from dragging your transaction backward in time.
Well, unlock time allows you to specify the absolute earliest block height at which a transaction becomes valid.
Okay.
Modern wallets automatically set the unlock time of your transaction to the current block height. So if the network is at block 100,000, your transaction's lock time is set to 100,000.
Meaning it can be included in block 100,000 or a block 100,001.
Right. But if a malicious miner tries to reorganize the chain and mine an alternative block, 99,999, and they try to pull your transaction into it to steal the fee,
The consensus rules reject it.
instantly, the entire network of nodes looks at the miner's rewritten block, sees a transaction with a lock time of 100,000 sitting inside block 99,999, and invalidates the entire block.
Wow.
The miner wastes millions of dollars in electricity. So by defaulting to this simple lock time rule, wallets ensure that high-fee transactions can only ever exist in the present or the future, permanently shielding them from historical fee snipers.
It is incredible to see how a seemingly administrative field, like a timestamp, acts as a structural defense for the entire network.
It's brilliantly simple.
When you peel back the layers, a Bitcoin transaction fee is absolutely nothing like swiping a credit card. It is a live adversarial environment. You have RBF and CPFP acting as your strategic levers, and you have pinning and sniping exposing the raw game theory of a decentralized system.
It forces a complete shift in mental models. I mean, you are participating in a relentless, automated global auction. And the implications of that auction will define the network's future.
So true.
We've explored the nuts and bolts of getting a transaction confirmed today, but consider this for a second. When fees eventually become the absolute majority of a miner's reward, how might this extreme algorithmic bidding war permanently alter the balance of power?
Between everyday users just trying to settle a payment.
And the mega miners who are mathematically writing the history of the network. It's something to think about.
It really makes you wonder who the system will truly serve at scale. The clean, binary certainty of traditional finance just doesn't exist here. It is an open market all the way down to the code. Keep questioning the hidden mechanics behind the systems you use every day, and we'll see you next time.